The simulation pod opened with a soft hiss. Tejo stepped out slowly, his body still feeling the echoes of pain from the virtual world. His real hands were shaking slightly, and his heart was beating fast. But his face showed nothing. He looked the same as he had when he entered the pod, calm and quiet and unremarkable. The simulation hall was silent. Over 100 cadets had entered the test. Most of them had failed within the first 10 minutes. Their pods had opened already, releasing shocked and humiliated soldiers who had learned the true meaning of defeat. They stood scattered around the hall, their eyes fixed on the human who had just done the impossible. Cadet Barak stood near the front of the crowd. The massive Korath who had bragged about breaking records just an hour ago was now covered in virtual sweat, his blue face pale with exhaustion. He had lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes against the simulation that this human had completed in 20-7. He could not speak. None of them could. Tejo walked toward the exit, his steps steady despite the phantom pain in his leg. The crowd parted for him like water flowing around a stone. No one blocked his path. No one said a word. They simply watched him pass, their eyes filled with emotions they could not name. Fear, respect, confusion, and something else. Something deeper. Understanding. They were beginning to understand what humans really were. In the control room, Instructor Velox sat alone at her desk. The other instructors had left, each one going to process what they had witnessed in their own way. Instructor Morak had not spoken a single word after the simulation ended. He had simply walked out of the room, his massive shoulders hunched forward like a soldier who had just lost a battle. Velox stared at the data on her screen. She had reviewed Tejo's performance 17 times now, analyzing every decision, every movement, every impossible survival. And with each review, her understanding of humans grew, and so did her fear. She opened the Academy's threat assessment database. This was a classified file, available only to senior instructors and military commanders. It contained detailed analysis of every species in the galactic community, rating their potential as allies and their danger as enemies. Humans were listed near the bottom. Category 3, the lowest threat level. The assessment described them as physically average, technologically primitive, and strategically insignificant. The recommendation was to monitor them casually, but focus attention on more dangerous species. Velox began to type a new assessment. Species: human. Origin: planet Earth. Sol system. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain what she had witnessed? How could she describe a species that turned weakness into strength, that made the impossible look simple? She continued typing. Previous assessment. Category 3. Limited threat potential. Recommended monitoring. Casual. Revised assessment. Category 1. Extreme threat potential. Recommended monitoring. Maximum priority. She stopped again. Her 3 eyes closed for a moment as she gathered her thoughts. Humans are not dangerous because they are strong. They are not dangerous because they are fast. They are dangerous because they do not accept limitations. Every obstacle becomes a tool. Every weakness becomes a strategy. Every impossible situation becomes a challenge to overcome. The words flowed faster now, driven by a fear that had been growing since she first watched Tejo enter the burning forest. Human history is a record of survival against impossible odds. Their planet is a death world by galactic standards, filled with predators, diseases, natural disasters, and climate extremes. Yet humans did not simply survive these challenges. They conquered them. They became the dominant species on a world that should have killed them. More importantly, humans do not give up. Galactic records show that when other species face overwhelming odds, they surrender or retreat. Humans do neither. They fight until victory or death, and they find ways to win that no other species would consider. Velox thought about what she had seen in the simulation. The way Tejo had used fire as cover. The way he had created fog from toxic pools. The way he had climbed an impossible cliff and fought through an army of enemies using nothing but thorns and a stick. She typed faster. Today, I witnessed a human cadet complete the survival test in 27 minutes and 34 seconds. The previous record, held by a Karath warrior who is now a general, was 43 minutes. This human, with no natural advantages, no special abilities, and no advanced training, beat that record by nearly 16 minutes. He did not win because he was stronger than the Karath. He won because he thought differently. He analyzed the enemy, identified patterns, exploited weaknesses, and turned the environment itself into a weapon. He approached the test not as a soldier, but as a predator. Velox felt a chill run through her body. She had used that word without thinking, but it was exactly right. Predator. Humans were predators. Not the kind that relied on strength or speed or natural weapons. They were something worse. They were predators that used intelligence, creativity, adaptability. They could face any enemy, study it, understand it, and find a way to destroy it. And the most terrifying part was that they hid this nature behind friendly smiles and average appearances. She completed her assessment with trembling fingers. Recommendation: human integration into the galactic military should be approached with extreme caution. Current classification systems do not adequately account for human capabilities. Humans should not be measured by physical standards or compared to other species using traditional metrics. Humans are not average. They are undefined. They do not fit into any category because they create their own categories. They rewrite the rules of any situation to favor themselves. Final note: during my 30 years as an instructor, I have trained soldiers from 47 species. I have seen the strongest warriors and the fastest scouts and the most heavily armored defenders. None of them have concerned me like this one human. Cadet. Not because he was the best. Fighter. Because he showed me what his species is capable of. And I do not believe we have seen anything close to their true potential. Velox saved the file and closed the database. She sat in silence for a long moment, her thoughts dark and troubled. The galactic community had welcomed humans 50 years ago. They had seen a small, weak species on a backwater planet and assumed they understood what they were dealing with. They had categorized humans as harmless, unremarkable, insignificant. They had been wrong. The simulation hall was empty now. Cadets had returned to their quarters. Instructors had retreated to their offices, and the massive room stood silent and dark. But one person remained. Park Taiho sat on a bench outside the hall, looking up at the purple sky of Nexera Prime. His face was still calm, still unreadable. If anyone had seen him, they would have thought he was simply resting after a difficult test. But inside his mind, calculations were running. He had learned a lot from the simulation. He had learned about the Academy's testing methods, about their AI programming, about their assumptions regarding combat and survival. He had learned how they measured strength and how they defined success, and he had learned their weaknesses. Tejo was not just a cadet. He was an observer sent by Earth's military to assess the Galactic Academy's capabilities. His mission was simple: learn everything, reveal nothing. The simulation had been a test, but not just for him. It had been a test of the Academy itself. And in Tejo's assessment, the Academy had failed. They had underestimated humans. Everyone always did. Tejo stood up and began walking toward his quarters. Tomorrow, he would return to his classes. He would train with his fellow cadets, follow orders from his instructors, and continue to appear ordinary and unremarkable. And all the while, he would keep watching, keep learning, keep preparing, because humans had learned long ago that the galaxy was full of dangers. Species that were bigger, stronger, faster, and more advanced than humanity. Species that could crush Earth's military with a fraction of their forces. But humans had also learned something else. No enemy was unbeatable. No obstacle was impossible. No odds were too high. They just had to be patient. They had to learn. They had to adapt. And when the time came, they would show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. Tejo smiled as he walked into the darkness. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but they would learn. They always did. The extraction point glowed blue in the darkness ahead. Tejo could see it clearly now. A circular platform at the top of the mountain surrounded by tall metal pillars. All he had to do was reach it and stand on the platform for 10 seconds. Then the simulation would end. Then he would pass the test that 99% of cadets failed. But between him and victory stood the enemy. They were everywhere. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The simulation had concentrated its forces here, creating a wall of black armor and red eyes around the extraction point. They knew that any surviving cadet would have to come this way. Eventually, Te-Ho counted the enemy soldiers from his hiding spot behind a large rock. 47. No, 48. One more was hidden behind a pillar on the left side. These were not random patrol units. These were the elite defenders, the final challenge of the simulation. Most cadets who made it this far died here. The report said so. Even General Drax, the Korath who held the record for fastest completion, had almost failed at this point. He had broken through the enemy line using pure Korath strength, smashing through soldiers with his bare hands until he reached the platform. Te-Ho did not have Korath strength. He could not smash through 49 enemy soldiers. He needed another way. He studied the extraction point carefully. The platform, the pillars, the enemy positions. And slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. It was a terrible plan. Dangerous, painful, possibly fatal. It was exactly the kind of plan that humans had used throughout their history. In the control room, Instructor Velox had called for backup. Other instructors had gathered around her, watching the humans scream with disbelief. The news had spread through the academy like fire. A human cadet was about to attempt the final stage of the survival test. "How long has he been in the simulation?" asked Instructor Morak, a massive Korath with scars covering his blue face. He was the combat instructor, famous for his strict training methods. 26 minutes, Krill answered. Morak made a sound of confusion. Impossible. Humans cannot survive 26 minutes on Korak 7. Their bodies are too weak. Watch the screen, Velox said quietly. Then tell me what humans can and cannot do. On the planet's surface, Tejo began to move. He did not try to hide this time. Instead, he ran directly toward the enemy line, screaming at the top of his lungs. His voice echoed across the mountain, drawing every red eye toward him. "What is he doing?" Morak demanded. "He is giving away his position. Suicide." Velox did not answer. She was watching. The enemy soldiers reacted instantly. Weapons came up. Targeting systems locked on. 49 killing machines focused their attention on one small human running toward certain death. They fired. Energy beams cut through the air, creating lines of burning light aimed directly at Tejo. But Tejo was no longer running straight. He was moving in a pattern that seemed random, zigzagging and rolling and jumping without any apparent logic. But there was logic. Tejo had watched the enemy fire their weapons during his journey through the simulation. He had noticed patterns. Small delays between shots. Slight tendencies to aim high or low. He had stored all of this information in his mind, and now he was using it. 3 beams missed him by centimeters. A 4th grazed his shoulder. burning through his uniform and leaving a streak of charred flesh. He did not stop. He could not stop. The first wave of fire ended. The enemy needed 1.3 seconds to recharge their weapons. Taeho had counted this delay dozens of times during his journey. He used those 1.3 seconds to cover another 20 meters. The second wave of fire came. Taeho threw himself to the ground and rolled behind a small pile of rocks. Beams exploded against the stone, showering him with fragments. One piece cut his cheek. Another burned his arm. He felt blood running down his face. In the control room, the instructors were silent. Even Morak had stopped making dismissive comments. They watched as the human dodged death again and again, moving through a storm of weapons fire that should have killed him 10 times over. He counted their reload time, Belloc said, her voice barely above a whisper. He knows exactly when they will fire and when they will pause. On the surface, Taeho reached the outer ring of enemy soldiers. He was too close now for them to shoot at him without hitting each other. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He pulled the thorns from his belt, the ones he had collected at the beginning of the simulation. They were sharp as glass and hard as stone. He had been saving them for this moment. The first enemy soldier turned toward him. Taeho drove a thorn directly into the joint between its helmet and its neck armor. The soldier sparked and fell. The second soldier swung its weapon like a club. Taeho ducked under the swing and jammed 2 thorns into the soldier's knee joint. The leg collapsed and the soldier fell forward. Taeho was already moving. He did not try to destroy the enemy soldiers. He only disabled them enough to create openings. A thorn in a joint here. A strike to a sensor there. He moved through the enemy line like water flowing through cracks in a wall. His stick, the branch he had taken from the forest, became a weapon of destruction. He used it to block attacks, to knock soldiers off balance, to create distance when he needed it. The stick was not strong enough to damage the enemy armor, but he was not trying to damage armor. He was targeting weak points, joints, sensors, exposed wiring. 20-7 minutes into the simulation, Taeho broke through the outer ring and ran toward the platform. But the enemy was not finished. A large soldier, bigger than the others, stepped into his path. This was the commander unit, the most dangerous enemy in the simulation. The commander unit was fast. Faster than Taeho. It swung a blade at his head with speed that should have been impossible to dodge. Taeho did not try to dodge. Instead, he dropped to his knees and slid under the blade, passing between the commander's legs. As he slid, he drove his last thorns into the back of the commander's knee joints. The commander stumbled. Taeho jumped to his feet and ran the last 10 meters to the platform. The enemy fired again. A beam hit his leg, and he felt his muscles scream in pain. He stumbled, but did not fall. He could not fall. Not now. Not when victory was so close. He threw himself onto the platform. 1 second. The enemy soldiers rushed toward him, their red eyes blazing with artificial anger. 2 seconds. Taeho tried to stand, but his injured leg collapsed under him. He fell back onto the platform, gasping in pain. 3 seconds. The first enemy soldier reached the edge of the platform. Its blade swung down toward Taeho's head. 4 seconds. Taeho rolled to the side. The blade missed him by a finger's width, striking the platform instead. 5 seconds. More soldiers reached the platform. They surrounded him, their weapons raised. There was nowhere to go. Nothing left to do. 6 seconds. 7 seconds. Taeho stopped moving. He lay on his back, looking up at the dark sky of Korak 7, surrounded by enemies that wanted nothing more than to kill him. 8 seconds. 9 seconds. Enemy soldiers froze. 10 seconds. The simulation ended. Victory. In the control room, there was complete silence. Every instructor, every technician, every observer stood frozen in shock. The timer on Taeho's screen showed his final time 20-7 minutes and 34 seconds, the previous record, set by General Drax after 30 years of cadets attempting this test, had been 43 minutes. This human had just beaten it by nearly 16 minutes. Instructor Morak was the first to speak. His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. That is not possible. But the numbers on the screen did not lie. A quarter. Human cadet had just aced the most difficult test in the Galactic Military Academy, and he had done it in less than half the record time. The burning forest of Korak 7 was alive with danger. Fire crawled through the trees like hungry animals, jumping from branch to branch, filling the air with smoke and ash. The heat was intense, enough to make breathing difficult. Most species would have avoided this area completely. Taeho ran directly into it. He had watched the enemy patrol patterns carefully. They avoided the burning areas because the heat interfered with their sensors. Where the enemy did not go, Taeho could move freely. The fire burned his skin. The smoke filled his lungs. But he kept moving, using the flames as cover while he crossed through the most dangerous part of the forest behind him. He could hear the sounds of combat. Other cadets were fighting the enemy, using their strength and speed and natural weapons. Most of them were losing. Taeho did not fight. He moved in the control room. Instructor Velox watched with growing amazement. The human had been in the simulation for 12 minutes now. 12 minutes was longer than most cadets lasted. The average survival time for third-year students was 8 minutes. Even the exceptional students rarely made it past 15. "He's using the fire," Krill said, his voice filled with disbelief. "The human is deliberately moving through the burning areas." Velox nodded. The enemy's heat sensors become useless in high-temperature environments. The human figured this out, but how? He is only been in the simulation for 12 minutes. How could he learn so much about the enemy so quickly? Velox did not have an answer. She had designed this simulation herself, programming the enemy soldiers with complex behaviors and adaptive tactics. The enemy was supposed to be unpredictable, impossible to analyze in a short time, yet this human was reading them like a training manual. On the planet's surface, Taeho emerged from the burning forest. His uniform was scorched and torn. His skin was red and painful. But he was alive, and he was now much closer to the extraction point. He stopped at the edge of a cliff and looked down. Below him was a valley filled with sharp rocks and toxic pools. On the other side of the valley was the mountain where the extraction point waited. But between here and there was open ground with no cover. The enemy would see him instantly if he tried to cross. Taeho considered his options. He could go around the valley, but that would take too long. The enemy was constantly moving, closing in on the extraction point. The longer he waited, the more soldiers would be waiting for him at the end. He could try to fight his way through, but he had seen what happened to cadets who tried to fight. Even the strongest Korath had been overwhelmed by numbers. Taeho was not strong. He could not win a direct fight. There had to be another way. He looked at the valley again. The rocks, the toxic pools, the steam rising from the ground. And then he smiled in the control room. Krill pointed at the screen. What is he doing now? Why is he going back into the forest? Velox watched as Taeho returned to the burning forest. He gathered several large pieces of burning wood and carried them to the edge of the cliff. Then he threw them down into the valley, aiming for the toxic pools below. When the burning wood hit the toxic liquid, something happened. The pools began to boil violently, releasing massive clouds of thick yellow steam. Within seconds, the entire valley was filled with fog so thick that nothing could see through it. Brilliant, Velox whispered. Taeho climbed down the cliff face, using the sharp rocks as handholds. He moved quickly through the yellow fog, navigating by touch and memory. He had studied the layout of the valley during his brief observation. He knew where the rocks were. He knew where the pools were. He did not need to see that the enemy soldiers in the valley were confused. Their visual sensors were useless in the thick fog. Their heat sensors were confused by the boiling pools. They fired their weapons randomly, hitting nothing but rocks and steam. Teho moved past them like a ghost. He reached the other side of the valley in 4 minutes. When he emerged from the fog, his skin was covered in yellow residue from the toxic steam. It burned, but not badly enough to slow him down. 18 minutes into the simulation, he was more than halfway to the extraction point. In the control room, Velox was no longer sitting. She was standing directly in front of Teho's screen, her forearms crossed over her chest. Krill stood beside her, his mouth hanging open in shock. "This is not possible," Krill said. "He is a human. Humans are weak. They have no natural advantages. How is he doing this?" Velox was asking herself the same question. She had studied humans when they first joined the galactic community. She had read the reports about their planet, their history, their biology. Nothing in those reports had prepared her for what she was seeing now. Humans were supposed to be average in every way. Average strength, average speed, average intelligence. They had no claws, no armor, no special abilities. By galactic standards, they were one of the most unremarkable species ever discovered. So how was this human making her most difficult simulation look easy? On the planet's surface, Teho reached the base of the mountain. The extraction point was at the top, less than 2 kilometers away. But the mountain was covered with enemy soldiers. He could see their red eyes glowing in the darkness, watching every path, every route to the top. A direct approach was impossible. Teho looked at the mountain with careful eyes. He noticed something. The enemy soldiers were positioned to watch the paths that other cadets would use. The easy paths, the obvious paths. But there was another way up the mountain. A way that no sane creature would attempt. The cliff face on the north side of the mountain was completely vertical. It was made of loose rock that crumbled at the slightest touch. No species would try to climb it. No species could climb it. No alien species. Anyway, Teho smiled and began walking toward the north side of the mountain. Humans have been climbing mountains for thousands of years. They had developed techniques for scaling surfaces that seemed impossible. They had learned to use their fingers and toes in ways that other species could not imagine. They had climbed ice walls and sheer cliffs and surfaces that defied logic. This mountain was nothing compared to what humans had conquered on their home planet. Teho began to climb. The rock crumbled beneath his fingers. But he moved quickly, always having 3 points of contact with the surface, while his fourth limb found the next hold. He did not look down. He did not think about falling. He focused only on the next handhold, the next foothold, the next meter of progress. 22 minutes into the simulation, he was climbing while other cadets were dying. In the control room, Velox realized she had stopped breathing. She forced herself to take a breath and continued watching. "He is climbing the north face," she said quietly. "No one has ever attempted the north face." "Because it is impossible," Krill replied. "The rock is too unstable. He will fall." But Teho did not fall. He climbed with a precision and skill that seemed almost supernatural. His hands found holds that should not have existed. His feet balanced on edges that were barely wider than his toes. He moved up the mountain like water flowing in reverse, defying gravity through pure technique. Halfway up the cliff, a piece of rock broke loose beneath his foot. For one terrible moment, he hung by only his hands, his legs dangling over a drop that would mean instant death. But he did not panic. He swung his body once, twice, and caught a new foothold. He continued climbing without missing a beat. "What is wrong with this human?" Krill whispered. Does he not feel fear? Velox shook her head slowly. He feels fear, but he controls it. He uses it. She had finally begun to understand what she was seeing. This human was not surviving despite his weaknesses. He was surviving because of something his species possessed that other species did. Not adaptability. Every challenge the simulation threw at him, he adapted. Every obstacle he overcame not with strength or speed, but with thinking and creativity. He turned the environment itself into his weapon, using fire and fog and terrain against the enemy. This was not luck. This was not accident. This was what humans were. Tejo reached the top of the cliff and pulled himself over the edge. He lay on his back for a moment, breathing hard, letting his burning muscles rest. But only for a moment. The extraction point was close now. Less than 500 meters away. He stood up and began to move again. 20-5 minutes into the simulation. 3/4 of the way to victory. And Instructor Velox was beginning to feel something she had not felt in 30 years of teaching. She was beginning to feel afraid. Tejo felt himself falling. Wind screamed past his ears as his body dropped through a dark sky filled with red lightning. Below him, the surface of planet Corax 7 rushed up to meet him. He could see burning forests that stretched for miles. He could see rivers that glowed with toxic green light. He could see mountains that looked like the broken teeth of some ancient monster. This was not a safe landing. There was no parachute, no safety net. The simulation was designed to test survival skills from the very first second. Tejo twisted his body in the air. He had studied the briefing files about Corax 7 the night before. Most cadets had ignored them, thinking physical strength would be enough. Tejo knew better. Knowledge was a weapon, and he had spent his life collecting weapons. He aimed his fall toward a large swamp near the edge of a burning forest. The water would be toxic, but it would also break his fall. Some pain now was better than death on impact. 3 seconds before hitting the ground, Tejo took a deep breath and crossed his arms over his chest. He hit the swamp water hard, plunging deep into the thick green liquid. The impact hurt, but nothing was broken. The toxic water burned his skin, but he had already started swimming toward the shore. Within 30 seconds of the simulation starting, Tejo was on solid ground, covered in toxic mud but alive and uninjured. In the control room, Instructor Velox watched the screens with her 3 eyes. Each screen showed a different cadet's experience. Most of them were not doing well. Cadet Borak, the confident Karth, had landed in a rocky area. He had broken 2 of his legs on impact. He was crawling toward cover while screaming in pain. The simulation would heal his legs eventually, but the psychological damage was already done. The Picani scout, who had bumped into Tejo earlier, was running at full speed through the forest. His species was known for their incredible speed, and he was using it to put distance between himself and the landing zone. But he was not looking where he was going. As Velox watched, he ran straight into a trap set by the enemy. Wire cut through his body, and his screen went dark. 1 cadet down. Less than 2 minutes into the test. Instructor, Krill said, pointing at one of the smaller screens. Look at the human. Velox turned her attention to Tejo's screen. What she saw made her pause. The human was not running. He was not hiding. He was standing at the edge of the swamp, completely still, looking at the environment around him. His eyes moved slowly, taking in every detail. The trees, the rocks, the patterns of movement in the distance. What is he doing? Krill asked. Why is he not moving? The enemy will find him if he stays in one place. Velox did not answer. She had seen many cadets freeze in fear during this test. But something about the human stillness was different. He did not look scared. He looked like he was thinking, On the surface of the simulated planet, Taeho finished his assessment. He had identified 3 possible routes to the extraction point. The first was through the burning forest, which offered cover but was filled with danger. The second was along the toxic river, which was exposed but might be too obvious for the enemy to guard heavily. The third was through the mountain range, which was the longest route but offered the best defensive positions. But before he chose a route, he needed supplies. Taeho moved quietly toward the edge of the forest. The trees on Korak 7 were tall and dark, with bark that looked like dried blood. Their branches were covered in thorns the size of his fingers. Most cadets would see these trees as obstacles. Taeho saw them as a resource. He broke off several thorns and tested their sharpness against his thumb. Good. They were hard and sharp, almost like glass. He gathered a handful and tucked them into his belt. Next, he found a fallen branch about the length of his arm. It was heavy and solid, with a slight curve at one end. He tested its weight and balance. Not perfect, but it would work as a weapon. Finally, he tore strips from his uniform and wrapped them around his hands and feet. The strips would protect his skin from the toxic plants that covered the ground. And they would also muffle his footsteps. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. In the control room, Krill was confused. What is he making? Those are just thorns and sticks. How will those help against the enemy? Velox did not respond. She was watching the human with growing interest. She had seen thousands of cadets face this test. Most of them relied on the natural advantages of their species. The Korath used their strength. The Bakani used their speed. The Melox used their armor. This human had none of those advantages. So he was creating his own. Back on the planet's surface, Taeho began to move. He did not run. He walked carefully, placing each foot with precision, moving from shadow to shadow. His eyes never stopped scanning the environment. He heard movement to his left. Something was coming through the trees. Most cadets would have run. Taeho dropped to the ground and became still. He pressed his body against the dark earth and controlled his breathing, making himself as small and quiet as possible. A figure emerged from the trees. It was one of the enemy soldiers. The simulation had designed them to look terrifying, with black armor and glowing red eyes. This one was carrying a weapon that looked like a combination of a rifle and a blade. The enemy soldier walked within 10 meters of where Taeho was hiding. It stopped and looked around, scanning the area with its glowing eyes. Taeho did not move. He did not blink. He did not even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the enemy soldier moved on. Taeho waited another 30 seconds before slowly rising from the ground. His heart was beating fast, but his movements remained calm and controlled. He had learned something important. The enemy soldiers relied on movement to detect their targets. If he stayed still, they could not find him. This was useful information. The human is still alive, Krill said with surprise in his voice. It has been 5 minutes. Most cadets are dead or injured by now. Velox nodded slowly. She checked the other screens. Cadet Borak had finally started moving again, but his broken legs had slowed him down. He was fighting an enemy soldier with his bare hands, using his Karath strength to tear the machine apart. But there were more soldiers coming. Many more. As she watched, Borak was overwhelmed. 3 enemy soldiers attacked him at once. His screen went dark. Borak is down, Krill reported. 6 minutes, 14 seconds. That is actually above average for a Karath. Velox made a dismissive sound. Above average is still failure. She turned back to Taeho's screen. The human was moving again, but now he was doing something strange. He was not heading toward the extraction point. He was moving toward a group of enemy soldiers. Is he trying to get killed? Krill asked. Why would he approach the enemy? But Taeho was not approaching them directly. He was circling around them, staying hidden in the shadows and thick plants. He was watching them, studying them. And then Krill understood. He's learning their patterns, Krill whispered. He is watching how they move and hunt. Velox felt something she had not felt in years. Interest. Real interest in a cadet's performance. Tejo spent 2 full minutes observing the enemy soldiers. He watched how they communicated with each other using hand signals. He watched their patrol patterns and timing. He noted which directions they watched most carefully and which areas they ignored. When he finally moved away from his hiding spot, he knew exactly how to avoid them. The human was not trying to fight the enemy. He was learning to become invisible to them. In the control room, more screens went dark. 10 cadets down. Then 20. Then 30. The simulation was brutal, and the enemy was efficient. But one screen remained bright. The human was still alive, and he was moving toward the extraction point with a speed and efficiency that made no sense. He should have been dead 10 times by now. Every other species relied on their natural strengths to survive. This human had no natural strengths, yet he was still alive. Velox leaned closer to the screen, her 3 eyes fixed on the small figure moving through the simulated LFK-OR Rax-7. For the first time in 30 years. She was genuinely curious about what would happen next. The morning sun of planet Nexera Prime cast a purple glow across the Galactic Military Academy. The massive building stood like a mountain of metal and glass, home to the best young soldiers from 47 different species. Inside its walls, warriors were made, legends were born, and dreams were crushed. Instructor Velox walked into the simulation hall with her 4 legs clicking against the cold floor. She was a Kelori, a species known for their sharp minds and even sharper tempers. Her gray skin seemed to absorb the light around her, and her 3 eyes scanned the room with cold precision. She had been teaching at the academy for 30 years, and she had seen thousands of cadets come and go. Most of them left with broken spirits. Today would be no different. The simulation hall was massive. It could hold over 200 cadets at once, each one connected to their own virtual pod. The pods looked like large eggs made of dark metal, with hundreds of wires connecting them to the main computer. When a cadet entered a pod, they would experience the simulation as if it were real. They would feel pain. They would feel fear. And when they died in the simulation, they would feel that too. Velox reached the center of the hall and pressed a button on her wrist device. A loud bell rang through the building, calling all third-year cadets to the hall. This was the day they had been dreading since they first joined the academy. The survival test. Cadets began to pour into the hall. There were tall Karth warriors with blue skin and muscles that could crush stone. There were small Pakani scouts with large eyes and quick reflexes. There were Melox soldiers with their armored shells and powerful claws. Species from across the galaxy gathered in the hall, each one wearing the gray uniform of the Academy. And then there was the human. Park. Tejo walked into the hall near the back of the group. He was not tall, not short, not muscular, not weak. By galactic standards, he looked completely ordinary. His black hair was cut short, and his brown eyes showed no emotion as he found his place among the other cadets. He stood between a massive Korath and a 4-armed Drelix, looking like a child standing between giants. Some cadets looked at him with curiosity. Others looked at him with pity. A few looked at him with open disgust. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, after the Galactic Council discovered their small planet hiding at the edge of known space. Most species still considered humans to be primitive, weak, fragile. Velox raised one of her 4 arms, and the hall fell silent. "Today," she said, her voice echoing off the walls, "you will face the survival test. This is not a game. This is not practice. This test will show us who among you has what it takes to become a true soldier of the galactic military. She pressed another button, and a massive holographic screen appeared behind her. It showed images of a hostile planet, burning forests, toxic rivers, and mountains that reached into a dark sky filled with lightning. The scenario is simple, Velox continued. You will be dropped alone on planet Karex 7. You will have no weapons, no supplies, no communication. Your only goal is to survive for 1 standard hour and reach the extraction point. A nervous whisper spread through the cadets. Planet Karex 7 was famous throughout the galaxy. It was a death world, a planet so dangerous that even trained soldiers avoided it. But survival is not your only challenge, Velox said, her 3 eyes narrowing. You will also face the enemy. The screen changed to show dark figures moving through the shadows. They were simulation enemies, artificial soldiers controlled by the Academy's most advanced computer. They were fast. They were smart. And they never got tired. The enemy will hunt you from the moment you land. They will not stop. They will not show mercy. They are programmed to kill with maximum efficiency. Velox paused and let her words sink in. In the 30 years I've been teaching this test, the failure rate has been 99%. The best Karath warriors have died within 20 minutes. The fastest Bacani scouts have been caught and killed. Even the armored Melox have been torn apart by the enemy. She turned and looked directly at the cadets. Only 12 cadets have ever passed this test. Only 12 in 30 years. The fastest completion time was 43 minutes, achieved by a Karath warrior named Drax, who is now a general in the Galactic Fleet. The cadets exchanged nervous glances. Even the biggest and strongest among them looked worried. Tejo stood quietly, his face showing nothing. A Karath cadet named Borik laughed loudly. He was the biggest in the class, with muscles that made other Karath look small. He had won every physical competition since joining the Academy. Instructor, Borik said with confidence, I will break that record today. Humans and weaklings may fail, but a true Karath warrior fears nothing. He looked at Tejo with a cruel smile. Several other cadets laughed. Velox did not smile. We shall see, Cadet Borik. We shall see. She gestured toward the simulation pods. Enter your assigned pods. The test begins in 5 minutes. The cadets moved toward the pods, each one finding the pod with their name displayed above it. Tejo walked calmly to his pod, ignoring the looks and whispers around him. A Bacani cadet bumped into him deliberately, almost knocking him down. Watch where you walk, human, the Bacani said. Maybe you should just quit now and save yourself the embarrassment. Tejo looked at the Bacani for a moment. Then he simply nodded and continued walking to his pod dot as he climbed into the dark metal egg. The door began to close around him. Wires connected to his temples, his chest, and his spine. The simulation would feel completely real. Every sensation, every pain, every moment of fear. Tejo closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His heart rate remained steady. His mind remained calm. He had read the statistics about this test. He knew about the 99% failure rate. He knew about the deadly planet and the unstoppable enemy. But he also knew something that Instructor Velox and the other cadets did not know. He knew what humans were capable of. Back on Earth, humans had survived ice ages. They had hunted animals 10 times their size. They had walked across deserts, climbed the highest mountains, and crossed the deepest oceans. They had fought wars that lasted for generations. They had built civilizations from nothing and rebuilt them after they fell. Humans were not strong. They were not fast. They were not armored or clawed or blessed with special powers. But they were. Survivors. The simulation countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Tejo opened his eyes. They were different now. Focused. Sharp. The eyes of a hunter. 7, 6, 5. In the central control room. Instructor Velox watched the screens as each cadet prepared for the test. Her assistant, a young Melox named Krill, stood beside her. "Instructor," Krill said nervously, "should we adjust the difficulty for the human? He has never experienced anything like this. Perhaps we should give him a fair chance." Velox made a sound that might have been a laugh. "A fair chance? The galaxy does not give fair chances. Let the human learn this lesson like everyone else." 4, 3, 2.1. The simulation began.